Hello, hello, hello. Today is Thursday, March 26th, and it's time for another episode session of Let's Talk Power Live. I'm Dr. Tangi. Welcome to Thursday. Welcome to Let's Talk Power Live. I am the CEO, founder, runner of the things of Liaison Educational Partners, where we sit at the intersection of instruction, culture, and curriculum. Our goal is to make sure every kid has access and receives the excellent education they deserve. We want them to have the skill, we want their teachers and their leaders to have the skill sets, mindsets, tools, and strategies so that they get that education that they deserve. And we do all of that through the lens of power. We look at how people, the adults, really understand power, how they learned about power, and how power is the shaper of many of the decisions that they make. But before we go any further, I want to ask you a question, and I'm going to give you an invitation. Question number one: have you subscribed to the channel? Have you hit the like button? We know in the day and age in which we live, likes and shares and subscriptions change the algorithm. Not many people are talking about power and education in a real way. We talk about it in ways that make it actionable, and we want more people to join us in this conversation. So that was the question. Here's the invitation. Go ahead and hit that like button, hit the subscription button, and please share this with somebody you know. Now, every single week, I talk about what I'm thankful for. I'm thankful that it's nearly spring. It's like 75 degrees outside where I am. The sun is out, the skies are blue, and I am grateful. I'm also grateful that I went to the airport today and I did not have to stand in a very long line. That's another thing I'm grateful for. The other thing I'm really grateful for, and I missed this yesterday, and I don't know how I missed it, but the president of Ghana, President John Mahama, was able to get a resolution passed in the UN Council. And he got 123 countries to say yes to a resolution making or naming and recognizing the transatlantic slave trade as a crime against humanity. Unfortunately, the United States, Israel, and Venezuela voted no. Yeah, you heard me right. Those three countries voted no to recognize the transatlantic slave trade as a crime against humanity. But I'm grateful for the 123 that said yes. So before we go any further, I want to just remind everybody that I talk about power, and people ask me every day, why do you talk about power in education? What is power in education? Much like they used to ask the question about what is culturally responsive education? Well, here's the thing. I'm going to share with you my definition of two things. Number one, education, power in education. And then number two, what instructional power is. And it's based upon my book. So I'm going to share both of those with you right now. And here we go. So this is what it is. This is what instruction, this is what power in education is, right? It says it right here. Education is the instrument of democratic designs, and it is no less the instrument of power, the control of information, the shaping of understanding, and the influence of judgment are critical elements common to democratic design, power theory, and educational philosophy. That is what power in education is all about. That democratic design based upon power theory and the way in which people understand their educational philosophy. So how does all of that come together for a definition of what instructional power is all about? Well, here's that definition. It can be understood as an educator's use of their state, district, and building ascribed job-related authority to afford or constrain a student's access to learning. What does all that mean? It means that an educator, and if you have followed me for any number of years or any length of time, when I say educator, I mean anybody whose job it is that impacts the education of a child who's not their own, and they get paid to do it. So that means an educator at the state level, at the district level, at the building level, at the classroom level. You're all educators. It means that you use the authority you have connected to your role, your position, your job function, not your title, but your job function, to either engage in actions that open doors for access or engage in actions that shut those doors for student access. That is what instructional power is all about. So this week, and over the last few weeks, we have really been delving deeply into a conversation around assessments. It is assessment season. I remember what my early days of assessment season was all about. It was stressful. I spent a lot of time worrying about outcomes and just wondering if what I had done all year was really making a difference in a student's academic outcomes. So we've been spending time around assessments, around language, and around power. Here is what we know about assessments. They are power tools. They're not neutral. They've never been neutral. Whenever you are evaluating a child or anybody else, the neutrality is out the window. And so we know over the recent years, before COVID and after COVID, that our assessments as a country have been largely stagnant. And particularly in reading, we have seen regression. Our NAEP data is showing that we still have not recovered from our COVID years of instruction when everything was online. So our students are still experiencing what we would call COVID residuals. I never like the term of learning loss because you don't lose learning. You don't lose learning. What you might be losing is the loss of memory, right? But you're not losing the actual learning of something. And what we had was we had interrupted learning during that time. We had unfinished learning at that time, but students weren't losing learning. So that was kind of my soapbox at that point. But what we know is that the assessments that students are getting right now, or they're about to go into right now, those results may not be coming to you at a time where you can do something about them, right? You are using what we call summative assessments right now, and that's the end of the year. But all along this year, you have been hopefully engaging in what we call formative assessments that can be used in a more timely manner. One of the things I remember most about my years in the classroom of this time of the year when we were really sort of shutting down our instruction, we literally shut instruction down. We stopped teaching and we spent all of our time up until it was time for our end of year assessment, marshaling kids. I'm thinking about the right word to say. We were marshaling kids through these stations. We would look at our most recent data, right? So we would do these mock assessments, right? Those pretend assessments that gave us some data. And we would use all of that data to then shuffle our students around. Who did well in what kind of skill, particularly on the ELA side, what skill. We would put them in groups, and then we would give them some assessments. And we would also then redesign our lessons so that they were able to then get some extra practice, right? And then we would shuffle the deck again and, do some more lessons. And then we would give them some ideas on, how to test better. The one thing we did not do, we did not pay attention to how we could make them partners in this process. So I want to share with you what I have been hearing and seeing around leaders this time of year and what people have been feeling. So what we know right now, leaders are reviewing a lot of benchmark data. right? You may be the leader in a building watching this right now or coming back to watch this. You might be an educator or a coach looking at this, joining me. I hope you're here right now. And if not, if you're coming back to watch it later, but you're reviewing a lot of benchmark data and you're making plans for your final instructional moves. Maybe you're going to take the strategy that we used in my old school, right? Where you're going to separate kids and put them into different learning groups and cycle them through a process of practice. You might be doing that. Maybe you're using Saturday school as a way to ramp up and give kids extra practice. Whatever strategy or strategic moves you're doing right now, all of it is going to planning for this last leg of instructional practices. And you're also supporting teachers who are most likely feeling some burnout, right? They're beginning to get pressure. They're feeling that pressure of what are the outcomes going to be. But the one question I really want to ask you is I want to ask you, and this one I'm going to talk to the leaders in the building. I'm going to ask you, how are you preparing your teachers to help your students be partners in this process? That's one of the questions I wished that someone had asked me, so that when we began the change of process, we were spending as much time on really connecting with our students in this process, not just about how do you feel, are you nervous, get your sleep. We talked about that because that's the thing you talk about, but we didn't talk about were they partners and how to make them more partners in this process. And so I want to really spend the next few moments this is my classroom. So, I like to do a little bit of teaching, a little bit of talking and all the things together. Really want to spend the next few moments walking through a way that you can drive data differently this year. Want to really dig into a process by which you can drive data. And then I'm going to give you an invitation at the end. So the first thing I want to introduce you to is D. So the drive is a framework, right? Because education always has acronyms. And so I'm giving you an acronym. It's called DRIVE. DRIVE stands for responsible, so data responsible. Then we're going to go through the R for responsive, the I for instructionally valuable, instructionally aligned, and then valuable, and then empowering. So I'm going to take you through all of that. The first one, though, is data responsible. This time of year, we are collecting. But I want to ask you, what are you collecting? Why are you collecting it? And how are you communicating the results that you get? When you are being data responsible, you want to make sure that you are getting information, not just labeling. You want to be informed, but you don't want to spend all that time letting your information be a tool so that you can then label. You also want to use this time to build trust. You also want to use this time to ask some real critical questions around why are we using this kind of assessment or this kind of process. So you are responsible with the way you do the testing as well as the outcomes that you were getting. Now, let's be clear. You may not be able to determine the type of assessment you give. If it is a state assessment, you have no hand in that pot. Even if you sit on a commission that looks at it, it is developed beyond your control, and I get it. But you can still be responsible with the questions that you ask about it. You can still build trust, and you can still use information without having to overly label kids. And we shouldn't be labeling kids anyway. And you want to ask that question around, how is this data going to prepare our students for the next part of their life, not just them being a set of outcomes? We look at students as just test takers and outcomes. But if we are responsible, we're going to take a different approach to it. And then the R is for responsive. The question that you want to ask yourself is, how are we interpreting the information we're getting. Again, is it just an avenue to assess, or is it an avenue to attach a label, or is it an avenue of real learning for both us as the adults, but more importantly, is it an avenue for students to begin to understand for themselves so that they can really begin to be partners? That's really important to think about, right? So take an inquiry approach and educate. And leaders, I'm getting this questions to you again. Don't assume that your educators, your classroom leaders, do not assume that they know what is being measured. So in this inquiry part, in the responsive part, have a real explicit conversation about what is being measured, so that they can respond appropriately, so they can interpret accurately, so they can plan in a way that leads to the promise of the kind of outcomes we say we want for kids, and that we're helping young people really understand this on their own. And then next, instructionally aligned. Now, here's the thing about this. What you don't want to teach one way and then assess another. And you don't want to teach certain kinds of information, but then assess different kinds of information. You do not want to create an information gap or an assessment gap, because what you have been teaching is not something that's going to be assessed. Now, let me go on the record here and say, this is not about just teaching to the test. But you don't want to be so far outside of the assessment as to create a gap in that students don't even know what they're being assessed on. I'm reminded of a school that I was working with. They loved novels. Listen, I'm a novel person. I love a good novel. But their assessment was more focused and leaned more towards informational text. What do you think happened? Those young people were not as prepared as their other students, as their peers who had spent ample time with informational text. So we want to make sure that our young people are really experiencing the assessment environment from a content perspective and from a process perspective. I was just in a school this past week, actually, and the principal wanted teachers to spend the next few weeks really helping young people get acclimated to the atmosphere of the assessment. Their assessments are computer-based assessments. So you don't want there to be a conflation of the assessment where kids are then trying to figure out the computer while they're trying to figure out the content. And her charge to her staff was, over the next few days, when they are engaging with their material from their curriculum, do so in the format that was going to be on the test. Use a computer-based process, help students get really clear about how to click, right? How to drag and drop information, how to really look at their prompts clearly and annotate the prompt and annotate the text itself. She had the whole thing laid out. So we go in, we observe classrooms. Lo and behold, we get in the classroom, and this one teacher is doing something completely different. Students are reading out loud. They are not annotating any texts. They're not taking any time to get familiar with the assessment process. What do you think is going to happen when students then take their end of grade test, which they start in a week and a half? Their anxiety is going to go up. They're not going to feel as prepared. So the instructional alignment is critical. And you have to balance out teaching, quote unquote, to the test with preparation for the test. It's fair. It should be okay for kids to be prepared to engage with the assessment, to do their best work in the way that they will be assessed. So Let's talk about value. Value is important here. The relevance of the assessment to the child. I'm going to ask everybody, all my educators right now, how much information have you shared with your students about why this assessment is being administered? Do they know? Is it relevant to their next academic stage? Have you helped them understand that? Have you equipped them with the knowledge so that when they take this assessment, they see the relevance, the connection, the clarity, right? And that they are prepared to take the right kind of action. That's critical so that they can really begin to ensure that they see it as valuable. If we were in person, I'd be saying, raise your hand if you've ever been asked, why are we going to take this? When am I ever going to use this? Young people ask that question because we adults do not give them that information. We don't see them as partners in this process. Therefore, we just keep on going with the instruction and we don't make it relevant. We don't give them clarity and we don't set them up for the right kind of action. And then last, but certainly not least, is this access point, this empowering point. Are we moving young people towards empowerment? Or are we protecting ourselves and protecting the system by keeping all the information to ourselves? When we empower young people for assessments, we open up access because here's what we know. Assessments are not neutral. They are power tools. That's really critical. Okay. They're power tools and we want to give young people the power they need to do their best. And we want to give them ownership and we want to build their independence. All three of these are important: access, ownership, and independence. How do we do that? We do that by engaging young people in their own assessment analysis processes. We've got tools like that. So if you're interested in some of those tools, go ahead and let me know. Go to our website. You can find some of our tools there. But when we are doing Drive, we want to make sure that we are opening access. We are building their assessment ownership so we can get them to be independent learners. We keep saying we want it. Here's how we can do it. So those are the ways that you can drive this way of data differently. All of this was a preview to our upcoming assessment readiness boot camp that starts on Monday. This was your preview so you can understand like this is the kind of work that we're going to be doing next week. We're going to be delving in to our Drive process, really asking some critical questions and giving you the strategies so that this year, when you're administering your assessments, you do it differently. You do it in a way that gets to this E, that brings kids along to open access, to build their ownership and give them the independence they need to move forward. So I do it every week. Let's talk about Drive with some power moves. And you're going to walk away with the strategic way of doing this next week when you are part of our assessment readiness bootcamp. So power move number 1, make data a shared experience. What does it look like? Students engage with their own data before adults finalize interpretations. Teams create space for student reflection alongside analysis. Then leaders normalize multiple perspectives on what data shows. What's the impact? You get stronger student data and the ownership of that data and agency development. It does increase. Power move number 2, interrogate what data does not show. We know what it does show, but there's also some information it's not showing. So power move number 2, interrogate what's not being shown. What does that look like? Leaders and educators asking, what might be missing in the data? Ask that question. what might be missing in the data. Teams examine where and how language, format, and context may obscure understanding. Remember what I just said about that teacher? She is obscuring the context by robbing kids of the experience of a testing environment. And then instructional decisions account for both seen and unseen learning. And the impact of that, stronger data interpretation and instructionally aligned decision making. That's the impact of that. And then data move number 3, position students to act on their data. If you have not begun your end of the year assessment, you're in a great position right now for all 3 of these power moves, but especially power move number 3, where you can position your students as owners and actors on their own data. What does it look like? Students identify their own next steps based upon their data. So if you've just given a benchmark or you are doing a mock end of the year assessment, once you give out that data to your kids, involve them in a mistake analysis so that they can begin to think about and consider their next moves, right? Teachers support goal setting tied to the actual evidence. This is going to build that access and ownership and independence. And then leaders ensure structures exist for student follow through. How can you help your educators and support your educators for the follow through? And then leaders, here's the impact. Leaders create the conditions for learning and data to become a tool for growth and not judgment. We want data to be a tool for growth and not judgment. These are your 3 power moves. It's essential this time of the year. And as I do every week, I want to give you a gem for your journey from data review to student agency. And this is my invitation to you to join us for our assessment readiness bootcamp. If what we talked about tonight resonates with you on any level, maybe you're an instructional coach, you're a building leader, a classroom leader, bring your team with you on Monday. Go ahead and scan that QR code. There's the link right there that you can type in and register today for our assessment readiness bootcamp. And when you do, you will unlock all that we talked about. You're going to walk away with a leadership snapshot. And if you decide that you want to go further, we have an implementation lab whereby you will get our leadership sprint, but not just for the getting of something new, right? It's not just really about that. This is about really driving data differently, really taking a more adaptive approach to the way in which your system and your processes for assessing kids changes in a way that's going to get your students to dial in and get your students to really lean into the assessment process and not check out. We know that kids check out, but joining this assessment readiness bootcamp is going to really position you as a leader, as an educator in the classroom, to really see your students as partners in this process. So that's my invitation to you. Oh, another one. Make sure you have subscribed. Hit the subscribe button. Go ahead, do it now. Hit it right now. And then hit the like button and hit the share. That was my invitation to you, so that you can then drive your data differently this particular year, and then take that drive data differently with you as you plan for the summer, because summer planning is tomorrow, basically. So go ahead, do that. Let's recap. So what have we decided? What does drive require of us? We know assessments are not neutral. They are a power tool, right? Students should not experience assessments as something done to them, but as something they actively engage in. Leaders are responsible for designing conditions where data builds agency, not just accountability. We love that word accountability, but is it leading to agency development in students? And then lastly, students deserve to be partners of the assessment process, not just outcomes of it. We look at outcomes, outcomes, but we need to remember that an outcome traces back to a human being. And so remember these four. Remember, assessments are a power tool. We want students to actively engage. We want there to be a responsible designing of the conditions, and we know that they deserve to be partners. So that's all we have for you this week. Remember to go ahead and join us next week for our Assessment Readiness Boot Camp. All the information is available to you. And then if you don't have your book, everything I talk about on Let's Talk Power Live is rooted and grounded in this book, Understanding Your Instructional Power. So go ahead and get your book. Thank you, everybody, for another week. I'm excited for next week. I look forward to being with you for the first week of April, next Thursday, 5:30. So have a good rest of your week, and thank you for being a part of Let's Talk Power Live.